What's up, guys? Alexander here with Date Psychology. Today, we're going to talk about the mate switching hypothesis. Made a video about this in the past. We're going to go over it again. I'm going to call this one, is the mate switch hypothesis a cope? Let's go forward and see why. So, Rollo, the rational male, he made this video. Why is the mate switching hypothesis a cope? Why it is a cope, right? Is it a cope? Well, I don't know. Watch the clip yourself. I'm not going to put a clip up here. It's about 10 minutes long. I don't think he really explains why it is a cope, but obviously this idea, right? This competing hypothesis, the mate switching hypothesis, or I could say competing hypothesis, but it's also a concurrent hypothesis that explains why do women in relationships select new partners, basically infidelity, affairs, that sort of a thing. Why do women cheat? So, of course, dual mating, we'll explain what that is, because I think this is something that filtered into the red pill, right, from evolutionary psychology. Filtered in and became kind of an ideological thing, right? Alpha fucks, beta bucks, all of that. And so, perhaps, this idea, right, of the mate switching hypothesis, this other idea is perceived as a threat, right? If you've made your whole ideology on this thing and you see a competing hypothesis that says, maybe this explains things a little bit better, yeah, maybe it seems a little bit of a threat. But anyway, you can watch the clip. We'll kind of go over. Brief introduction, okay? Dual mating and mate switching. What is this? What are we talking about, right? Well, we have the dual mate hypothesis. This is that extra pair sex or infidelity occurs to secure the good genes of another man while retaining the current relationship, the long-term resource provider, right? So this is also closely related to ovulation across the research, and that has not filtered as much into the manosphere takes on it, the red pill takes, but that's an important part of that hypothesis. Initially, the idea that women are not fertile all month long, typically. So, of course, this is going to be something that occurs on the side during a short period of time. We should see research, for example, that shows heightened propensity to cheat when a woman is ovulating. A lot of that research, it hasn't replicated. I've talked about this in the past. And then we have the mate switching hypothesis. And what is this? Basically, that infidelity occurs to switch from one long-term relationship to another. Mate switching, as it sounds, right? Switching from one mate to another mate. So, are these really incompatible? Right off the bat, I'll say no. They're not. These can be seen as alternative explanations in some cases, competing hypotheses in some cases, and also complementary hypotheses. So these are not two things that are contradictory to one another, but perhaps a little bit better understanding of it will help you understand why that is. But we should ask, what's more common? Is it, this securing of the good genes per the dual mating hypothesis? Or is it mate switching, infidelity to transition to a new relationship? Well, let's go forward and see. In this video by Rollo, right, all throughout, he uses a lot of anecdotes. Steve Harvey, Titanic, Jeff Bezos, kind of the archetypal pool boy and the bored housewife. And I think Rollo's favorite, right, is Chad at the foam party, right? Someone goes to the foam party in Cancun and she hooks up with a hot guy or something like that. So if we were to take these anecdotes, what would they indicate, right? Steve Harvey, for example, right? I think he was cheated on. Or I don't know if he's the new boyfriend. I had to look this up. But mate switching, why? They left one relationship for a new one, for the affair partner, right? The movie Titanic, I don't know. To this day, I still have not seen it. I guess he drowned in the span of a couple of days. So do we really know, if it was going to be mate switching or dual mating? I don't think we know. Jeff Bezos. So he had a long-term affair, got divorced. The woman was married. She got divorced. Now they're married. So this is mate switching, right? This is not dual mating typically. The pool boy and the housewife, yeah, that's probably something you could say is like dual mating, or like a one-night stand with Chad at the foam party. Yeah, that's something that you could say perhaps would be more consistent with dual mating as we understand it. But let's go forward. So what do we know in general about women, affairs, sexual behavior of women, right? We know that women seek out affairs less than men. Much, much less. You can see this, in the reports of men and women both. Men report it much more. You can see this in divorce statistics as well. where if you ask, why did you get divorced? Men will report of themselves that they cheated at a rate about twice as high as women and twice as high as they report of women being the reason for divorce, right? So you have kind of agreement there between men and women. As far as infidelity leading to divorce, you can see this in the sex differences for affair-seeking apps, right? The male to female ratio on apps or website services like Ashley Madison, for example, where people go to seek out affairs, overwhelmingly, it's men. It's usually not, Chad from the pool party, the phone party, or whatever the case may be. It's usually not, that kind of a thing. So how does this actually happen? How do these kind of build up and become what they are? Affairs tend to build slowly over time, often with someone that is a known person, right? Emotional connections are made over time. And it's very often the case as well that women fall in love with their affair partners rather than these just being like one-off. So going forward, we can make note of this, right? Emotional affairs. A lot of affairs don't culminate in sex, right? They don't get to that point, but nonetheless, they build a relationship over time with the intimacy of a long-term relationship. So it's important to understand a lot of affairs are effectively long-term relationships with a second partner, right? They begin way before sex occurs, right? And they gradually build up over time, and they often end up in leaving the partner for a new partner. Or if they end, maybe there's sex, maybe there's not, whatever the case may be. But affairs very often involve an emotional component. It's rarely just sex. This is for women, and that's not the case for men. When men seek out affairs, right? Men will go on to Ashley Madison or whatever, just looking for sex. No emotional connection. This is kind of one of the big sex differences between men and women when it comes to cheating behavior, right? What else do we know? Affairs often begin when relationships are in decline or they're missing something, right? So it's usually not the case that, a relationship is going perfectly well, there are no problems, and then boom, affair, okay? There's always kind of something there. And again, this is for women. This is not for men, because men are much more likely, and I've said this many times, to cheat if the opportunity is available, even when the relationship is perfectly fine. That doesn't seem to be quite the case for women. Okay, and affair partners, they very often desire a new relationship with the affair partner, right? That's often part of the fantasy. Again, much more for women than for men. So it seems to be the case, that affairs in general they have the trappings, they have the form of a long-term relationship in that sense. They're rarely just one-offs, which should make you question, to what extent do these facilitate merely the acquisition of good genes from a better mate? Or to what extent do these facilitate switching mates, right? Seems a little bit more like switching. Let's go on. So we can ask, we have, good genes on the one hand, and then we have kind of unfulfilled needs. One thing we can ask is, does the new partner have better genes, right? In which case we might ask something like, are they more attractive? Are they stronger? Are they taller? Do they have stronger immunocompetence? Whatever the case, is signaled through facial attractiveness, although that's another thing that hasn't really replicated that well. The idea that facial attractiveness signals better immunocompetence. Nonetheless, we can ask. And it probably is the case that affair partners are more attractive or more desirable in some way. Why? Well, they were picked, right? They were picked over the current partner. Rather than understanding this merely as good genes, it's probably better to understand this as, the affair partner at the very least has something that the current partner doesn't. Right? And that could be anything at all. Something that the current relationship is not providing. Could be a lack of sex, a lack of emotional intimacy. You could fall out of love with the old partner and now you're in love with someone else. Whatever the case may be, the affair partner is providing something. If it's excitement, a relief from boredom, and we'll talk about boredom a little bit as well. All of these things that motivate people, that are missing in the current relationship, that motivate people to seek it elsewhere. Good gene acquisition, as I mentioned, in the dual mate hypothesis, and this is often ignored, it's related to ovulation, okay? We do know, some women are going to cheat when they're horny. They're going to be more horny in general with ovulation. That's one of the effects of ovulation that does seem to replicate, is that women report higher libido when they're ovulating. Past research that has looked at this says, okay, so when are women more attracted to an extra pair partner when ovulating? This seems to be the case when the current partner is low in attractiveness. If the current partner is high in physical attractiveness, it doesn't seem to be the case. They remain attracted to the partner and libido increases. But when the current partner is low in attractiveness, and I have a video covering research on this as well, then that's kind of when the interest toward extra pair individuals. So rather than novelty seeking in that case, which is the case for men, right? Affairs, extra pair sex, all of that in men seems to be driven largely by novelty. In women, it could be driven by, not just someone different, right? Because men will select down, but someone who is better in that sense. Let's go on to the next slide. So, in the context of affairs, I mentioned relationship satisfaction, and something should be said about pair bonding in love. If you look up Sternberg's triangular theory of love, and this is kind of phases of love as they manifest over time. One is romantic love. Romantic love is basically probably what you think of when you think of love, right? The feeling of being in love, and this facilitates pair bonding. But for many people, perhaps most, this is something that fizzles out. It's typically considered an early stage of relationships, okay? Not immediately, but 3 to 5 years. And certainly some couples, they can keep this going forever. So it's not always the case. Again, there's research on romantic love. We know it continues for some people. But for many people, it seems to fizzle out. So we also see that relationship satisfaction declines for couples over time, just as a natural course of things, right? Probably because human beings evolved as, a serially monogamous species, not a lifelong monogamy kind of species, right? Nor something that's very, very short, like a bird, right? Where it's just one season. So relationship satisfaction, we also know it declines much more quickly for women and much more steeply, okay? So they begin to experience relationship dissatisfaction earlier and more relationship dissatisfaction. So we also know as people get older, right, they begin to lose attraction to their partners. And aside from that, with age, people simply become less attractive very often, right? They get fat, they let themselves go in relationships. Again, in the research, that's something that's seen. Male testosterone drops when they're in a committed relationship. Men and women both, they gain weight in a committed relationship. And when individuals begin an affair, they begin to enhance their looks. Before they begin an affair, before they begin a divorce, upon breaking up, and when they're single. This is men are more likely to attend to the gym, women also more likely to go onto diets, more likely to engage in grooming for their physical appearance, all of these sorts of things. So it seems that people seem to know, perhaps even unconsciously, with the decline or this, kind of pull to leave a relationship that, I have to increase my mate value, okay? Let's go on to the next slide. What else do we know? Differences between men and women that contribute to this, okay? Sociosexuality. Basically, a short-term mating orientation, casual sex. How open are you to sex outside of a long-term relationship? Sex with multiple partners. How many people have you had sex with over your life? And so on. These are things that are in, the sociosexuality inventory. So we know that most women are oriented toward long-term relationships much more than men. Here's a chart. This is just a single item, but it does correlate with the SOI inventory that shows, how open are you to casual sex? Simple one-item question, asking men and women. Yeah, most women, they're down at a 1 or a 2, right, out of 7. So this is the kind of thing that, or out of 5, I should say. This is the kind of thing that, men pretty open to it across the board, kind of a flat distribution almost. Women not open to it at all, right? And this is something that's very well replicated, this sex difference, across cultures, time, whatever, okay? And the difference is large, right? Cohen's d of 0.9, that's much larger than personality differences you typically see in psychology. So given that women are not that oriented toward short-term relationships, casual sex, you also have to ask, how often are women seeking affairs for sex, as men seem to do? How often are women seeking affairs for a relationship, right? An external relationship, a switch to a new relationship, some kind of emotional connection, a concurrent relationship, right? Because that's what a lot of affairs are, a relationship with two people at the same time. So going forward, here's a new study published this year, just popped up in my notifications like a couple of days ago. Has a sample size of 90,000, okay? It's called Between the Lines of Betrayal, an examination of a large-scale survey on sex differences in infidelity behavior, motivations, and outcomes. I wanted to share this with you in this video because I think it can kind of help inform perhaps why people cheat and if this is more related to, dual mating or if it's more related to mate switching. Here are the results. And they asked, characteristics of the affair and motives for it as well. So how many had a one-night stand? Okay, and one-night stand is, they only had sex one time. So this could have been a long-term affair. We don't know for sure, right? It could have been something that went on and then they had sex once, whatever, probably. Men, 72%. Women, 53%. So yeah, men are more likely to have a one-off. How multiple affairs? This is the percentage of people that had an affair, right? This isn't just like all men and women. This is only people that had an affair, that kind of opted into this. Okay? How many had multiple affairs? 67% of men who had an affair had multiple, 53% of women. And those are the ones in red at the top where men score higher than women, okay? The other ones below, women more reported this than men. So for men, multiple affairs, one night stand. So sexual motivations. For women, what are they higher in? They're more likely to have an affair because they were bored, more likely to have an affair because of revenge. Revenge is actually a common motivation for affairs. If one partner cheats, it's often the case the other will try to as well. Emotional affairs. And we have a high percentage here, probably because men and women both reported that, an emotional component to affairs, which seems to be the case, right? That it's rarely just sex. It's, much more often something emotional as well. It's a relationship, essentially. So 91% of women who had an affair said that it was an emotional affair. 77% of men. So for women, emotionality and emotional connection is much more important here as a driver of this, okay? Relationship problems, 74% of women, 48% of men, okay? So that tells you something else, which is kind of what I said at the beginning of this video and what I've said in the past many times. Men will often cheat when there are no relationship problems. For women to cheat, there needs to be some kind of problem, and if not a problem specifically, a decline in satisfaction or something going on that kind of opens that door, right? And finally, here's the percentage that considered leaving the current relationship. Only 20% of men, but 50% of women, okay? So this was something they found in this paper, was that for women, affairs are often concurrent with the desire to leave a relationship, often for the new partner, right? And even, in past research, even if women don't necessarily end the relationship and end up with the affair partner, they very often end the relationship anyway, right? Why? Because they probably had something going on there that was leading up to that point. Regardless, men, however, very low intention. Why? Because for men, it's much more about simply sex. For women, it's about much more than that. It's about the new partner. It's about the problems in the current relationship, a change over time where it's like this relationship is ending. Anyway, next slide. What can these results kind of tell us perhaps about dual mating or mate switching? So this one night stands, and this could still be consistent with mate switching. We don't know if these were long-term affairs that led up to sex once, but we can call this dual mating, right? 53% for women. So, these are not two hypotheses that it has to be one or the other, right? So that could be it. There could be some dual mating going on. Emotional affairs, 91%, right? So mate switching there. Leaving the primary partner, that desire would be consistent with mate switching as well. Relationship problems, if you're ready to leave the current relationship, right, and you're finding someone else because it makes it easier to do that, yeah, mate switching. Boredom, revenge, is that mate switching? Yeah, it doesn't seem to be seeking out good genes, does it? It seems to be based on, problems in that dyadic interaction in the current relationship. And, and consider leaving, kind of like I mentioned before, yeah, 50%. So next slide. This is, the original paper by David Buss, The Mate Switching Hypothesis, the same title. From the abstract, a quotation: "The mate switching hypothesis provides both a complementary and in some instances a competing explanation to the good genes hypothesis for why women have sexual affairs." Let's look at some of the research in this paper. This is a review of all of the research, so some findings from that. What do we know about infidelity? For men, the evolutionary rationale for infidelity is quite clear. The more women a man can impregnate, the higher his reproductive fitness. But that's not the case for women, right? A woman has the same reproductive fitness if she has children across her entire life, with one man that she does if it's with many men. And there might be some exceptions. Could it, enhance genetic diversity? Yeah, maybe a little bit, but it's not quite so clear. Women are bound by time. They have a 9-month pregnancy. Then they have the burden of childcare and raising the child in ways that men don't, because men can get someone pregnant and leave, and if the child survives or whatever, no cost to them at all. Kind of back to, Trivers' parental investment theory, right? Small gametes, spray and pray strategy. Large gametes, the egg that the woman has, yeah, much more investment. And that goes all the way into behavior. So what else do we know? Abandoning a mate to be single, it's very difficult in many different ways, and more for women, okay? What happens if a woman cheats, or if she just wants to leave, historically, in an ancestral environment, or even in, recent history, hundreds of years ago? She could experience violence from the mate. She could be rejected by society. There might be conventions that make it much more difficult for her than for the man. She might not be able to receive resources to take care of that offspring. Even now, in a modern environment, when people can get divorces fairly easy, it's not easy to leave. People have entanglements, as the psychologist Sean Smith put it in his new book called Gatekeeper. It's a good book. I would recommend it. People get, they live together, so they're sharing a house. They have pets that they have together, right? Now they're married. They're going to have to sell the house and split the assets. There's a lot of things that keep people together in relationships that if they had met, tomorrow, if they had never met before, and they met the other guy, they would go with the affair partner. But they have all these entanglements, so it's, very different picture. Leaving a relationship, especially in marriage. So abandoning a mate is not easy. And that means, that if someone is going to do it, to be with someone else, there kind of has to be, enough security and incentive there to make the switch worthwhile. And so why are affairs long, given that? Why are they not just these one-off things often? Probably because, women are assessing affair partners as long-term mates, right? And we know, consistent with this in the research, women keep, perhaps affair partners around as mate insurance. If something happens to the first one, yeah, now they got somewhere else to go, don't they? And men do this as well. Backup mates. People keep friends around them as well, who have all of the traits and characteristics that they say that they desire in romantic partners, right? So-and-so is just a friend, right? That kind of a thing. Well, no, maybe they're not just a friend. Maybe they are a potential backup mate. And this is not necessarily a conscious thing either, right? This is something that people just do almost instinctively, in a sense. Sometimes it might be conscious, right? Some people might very well know that they're doing that. Others, maybe not. They just want to surround themselves, with people that are kind of attractive to them in some way, to not be that isolated. But whatever the case may be, we see kind of this whole cluster of behaviors that says, okay, people have mates, potential mates at hand in case something happens to the current relationship. And when people are considering, maybe I want to leave the current relationship, maybe I want something else, they really kind of have to vet like that someone else pretty well first, right? It's usually not a super impulsive thing. So let's go on to the next slide. What kind of evidence do we have for the mate switching hypothesis, right? As I mentioned, relationship dissatisfaction. We know that this is pretty much the strongest predictor of infidelity that there is, okay? We know that, as soon as the relationship starts to decline, yeah, people kind of want out at that point. They fall out of love. They're not into it anymore. It typically does not pick back up past that point. And so, when people are assessing, how do I leave the relationship? If they want to kind of pad that, having someone else ready might be a good way to do that. We also see, that sexual interest in extra pair partners, also it increases when ovulating. That's consistent with mate switching, but also with dual mating, isn't it? So it's important to consider, that if it was merely seeking out good genes, why would relationship satisfaction predict this so well? Right? You would always want to seek out good genes. We'll get into that a little bit as well. Expressed interests. So self-reports in this case, with all of the limitations that come with those. What do we know? What do people say about their affair partners? The new partner is more desirable, both behaviorally and physically often, okay? That it makes the breakup easier for them, right? If you ask why, what was the point of this? So it's kind of like, yeah, because I wanted to end the relationship. So already we see that, yeah, mate switching is kind of what people are saying just right off the bat. Like, yeah, I wanted to switch mates. Okay, I want to replace the current partner. That's another one, okay? They're saying it flat out. Ask them, why did you have an affair? Because I want to be with the affair partner, because I want to replace the current partner. And then finding a new partner for a long-term relationship as well. So these are motives, conscious motives that people have that they will report. Why? What was the motive for the affair? And it's often, yeah, seeking someone else for a long-term relationship. Much more rarely is it, they were hot and I was horny. Certainly that occurs, but not as common. What else do we know? Okay, 79% of women, they fall in love with their affair partners. This is not the case for men. For men, it's about 30%. Okay, so again, men seek affairs for sex, women seek affairs to mate switch, basically, for long-term relationships. Love is a very important part of these affairs for women in ways that it's not for men who may just be seeking sex. Let's go on. What else do we know? We know that women pick affair partners with men who have long-term relationship traits. And the traits that are desirable in short and long-term mates, they tend to actually be very similar, right? Some may be weighted differently, right? Like, in a short-term partner, people value physical attractiveness more. But that doesn't mean, and I see this often kind of misunderstood, that, physical attractiveness is not important in a long-term mate. These are two things that get rated like really highly, or I should say, physical attractiveness gets rated very highly for both long and short-term mates, but it's a little bit higher, just a little bit, for short-term mates, right? But if you ask about the traits of men that women had affairs with, they'll tell you also, according to this research, they're dependable, they're emotionally stable, successful, honest, intelligent, mature, and unselfish. And these are the top traits just in a desirable partner generally across David Buss's research, cross-cultural research. These are all behavioral traits, and they're all long-term relationship traits, right? Those are not traits that you're looking for in a short-term partner. So again, we see, that women are saying, yeah, my affair partner basically has all of the traits that I would want in someone as a long-term mate. And what else do we know kind of contrary to the dual mate hypothesis, right? Extra pair paternity. What is that? Cuckoldry, right? It's, having the kid of another man. The rates of this are very, very low historically, which we can see through genetic records, and we can also see this through like parentage, lineage, and that sort of thing. So 1 to 5%. It doesn't seem to be the case, as I'm sure dual mating happens as a strategy discussed in this paper. It's probably a minority strategy, and it probably describes, a small portion of why people cheat, why they have affairs, and we can kind of see this, in how often is it resulting in what we expect it to result in, right? Which is staying with one long-term partner, but having the child of another man with better genes. It's not happening very much, which may be the most damning thing for the dual mate hypothesis, that perhaps, people do seek out good genes or whatever, but that doesn't mean they seek out good genes as short-term partners, does it? There's nothing necessarily about that, about one that implies the other. They could simply just be seeking out good genes, which, influence physical attractiveness and height, but also behavior, right? Half of personality is genetic. So, being dependable or loyal or intelligent, all of that genetic. So seeking that out, but perhaps not for short-term relationships, perhaps not simply to get knocked up, but to make a switch to a new partner. Let's go on. What is the big picture here? Recapping everything, what do we know? Mate switching and dual mating. These two hypotheses, they're not incompatible, but it probably is the case that mate switching intentions are more common. And I say intentions here because even when people have a bad relationship and they cheat, a lot of those relationships don't end, at least not right away. So it's not necessarily that we're going to see it in every single case, but we know kind of what people are thinking and feeling about this, and it's often like, yeah, if I could be with the new guy, I would, but there's so much other stuff going on and circumstances and all of that perhaps block that. What else do we know? Affairs often occur with known persons. So women are not seeking out strangers to have an affair, right? Someone who's just a friend. Or in the first paper, I think it was about 60% of women said that they had an affair with a partner that was known by the husband. So most of these affairs are not being met as strangers in bars or, on Ashley Madison. They're being met almost incidentally by accident. Circumstances put them there. These affairs persist over time, and these affairs, they have the emotional characteristics, the dyadic interactions that you expect from long-term relationships, okay? So rather than merely resembling, a one-off, it's very often the case that, these are extended things. These are relationships in and of themselves. We know, again, that new long-term relationships, they do get formed from affairs. People do leave current partners to be with others, especially, if they're not very entangled, right? If they're not living together or married, but it's, boyfriend and a girlfriend in college, yeah, she'll cheat and then go with a new guy and be his girlfriend. That's very, very common. Less common is people have, built a life together and that sort of thing because it's difficult, but not because they don't want to. Okay, and we know that affairs occur when the relationship is kind of on the way out. If that's a decline in romantic love, decline in relationship satisfaction because they're bored, or there's a decline in sex, whatever the case may be, there's problems in the relationship. And that's a big, big motivation for women more than it is for men. Okay, so given that, we see kind of this concurrency where problems in the current relationship, a desire to leave, leads to seeking a new mate in that sense. Anyway, last slide. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned some things. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, and I will make another for you very soon.